So this is it, the final closing arguments today in the President Trump's trial in New York City. This, of course, involving the hush money payments, the money. Was it a business expense? Was it a legal expense? Remind yourself, as bad as this went for the prosecution in the last week in the news, with revelations about even stolen money from President Trump and some members of his past team, that the jury here is in New York City, is a Manhattan jury. So whatever happens in these closing arguments, which could finish by the end of today, they're trying to finish by evening. You can then, again, the jury gets its instructions. They go, and sometimes you get decisions very quickly. Sometimes you get decisions a week later. I mean, they don't have a timeline. So again, I think because even though there's these 35 counts, Logan, really you only have to figure out one.
You know, it could be over tonight. So by the time we're broadcasting you tomorrow, there's a chance we have a verdict.
Now
it could go
a chance,
on and on.
There is a chance that they just can't finish the closing arguments today because, again,
any kind of delay.
Delays like someone's got a juror has an emergency, or someone that was, the testimony goes on a little past 7 or 8 o'clock. They try to end around not so late.
Yep.
So could we have a verdict tonight? Yes. Is it more likely in the next, I'd say 48 hours? Probably more likely in the next 48 hours, but who knows? Because we haven't been inside the courtroom. All we're taking this from really is from two partisan sides of the news.
Is there a hung jury scenario that could happen here? People are asking that in the comments. I'm seeing that a lot, saying if not necessarily purely guilty or not guilty, but just they cannot come to a conclusion.
On a 6-week trial like this, when you've seen some interesting characters that could be fairly confusing to you, could feel one way, and the next day, you get a character who gets up there and starts saying, "Oh yeah, I also took $30,000 from this guy and didn't tell him about it." An embezzlement, and it was the cast of characters that was testifying to this can be fairly off-putting. Yeah. I mean, so when you have, the head of the National Enquirer, and Stormy, Stephanie Richards, and then you've got Michael Cohen. It's just a whole group of people they're not the most trustworthy on either side.
Yeah.
So I think what you have to then go down and look to is kind of like what you feel in your gut. Like, did Donald Trump really believe he was violating the law? They're saying all these horrible things about him in New York, and he's been working in New York for decades and never had any issues like this. You had Robert De Niro come out and say today, he's destroying New York. And the truth is he's built a quarter of New York. Yeah. I mean, I
don't know if he's looked around New York recently. I don't believe Donald Trump is to blame for the disaster that's currently there.
No, not at all. And instead, what they're trying to do is kind of erase the history of Donald Trump in New York because he decided to go political. I'm sure Robert De Niro went to tons of events with Donald Trump.
We got a clip. Let's hear from Robert De Niro.
This was today by the Biden campaign. He is speaking on behalf of the Biden campaign officially.
In front of the courthouse. They had set up essentially their own little campaign stop.
Yes, which they said they weren't going to do this time, but I guess finally they've had a change in
well, the poll numbers have come in, and we got to do something. We got to pull in Bobby De Niro. Let's hear from him.
Under Trump, this kind of government will perish from the earth. I don't mean to scare you. No, wait, maybe I do mean to scare you. If Trump returns to the White House, you can kiss these freedoms goodbye that we all take for granted. And elections, forget about it. That's over. That's done. If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. He will never leave. You know that. He will never leave.
This was a huge change in strategy. So if you've been watching this trial since the beginning, which if you turn on any cable news, you couldn't have not seen it for the last 6 weeks.
You're watching them essentially live tweet it for the last 6 weeks.
Because there's no cameras inside, so you get pictures, you get sketches, and really you're dealing with people's opinions, which even media opinions and journalist opinions are one-sided these days. But ultimately, the Biden campaign said, we're not going to say anything until, and the Biden White House said, we're not going to say anything until there's a verdict. And when there's a verdict, President Biden will make a statement. And now supposedly that statement he's going to be making it from the White House because he doesn't want to look like he's on the political campaign trail, make it like a political event.
I don't know. It feels like it's more of a political event to address the nation.
I know.
It's like when they went after Donald Trump for having the RNC during COVID at the White House. I feel like that's a very similar situation.
I do too. Yeah. But today they decided we cannot just allow President Trump to use this as a platform for a press conference and his team. So he was having different people come up and appear throughout the week. So they threw up Robert De Niro, who again, elderly, has said some crazy political things in the past, and is
new father. I mean,
that's
one of
the
best, one of the greatest actors of all time.
Yeah, but a strange person to pick as your person to put forward. But I think what it shows you is there's not a lot of support for Joe Biden. Even in what you heard from Robert De Niro, it was just anti-Trump.
Yeah, it was
Joe
just
Biden
scare
is just he's just the filler for we can't have Donald Trump, so I guess you vote for Joe Biden.
That is the campaign.
No one's excited about Joe Biden.
The campaign is don't listen to what Trump is saying. Don't listen to what RFK is saying. By the way, don't listen to what the world is saying. Don't look at the outside. Don't go outside in New York, because all of this goes away if Donald Trump becomes president. That's all they have to market. They're marketing an anti-Trump marketing. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden being the president, because they know that is not something that sells. But what sells is fear.
But I want people to understand that was official today by the Biden campaign.
Yeah, that was a campaign stop.
I heard over the last week that the judge, thinking about his jury instructions, was going to tell them that they don't have to be unanimous to have a conviction on Trump. And I wonder if that's even possible.
Yes, because there's 34 charges. They're very similar. So while I said that they're very similar, there's some are different because some were made in a ledger. Some were actually invoices that they have, like an invoice for Michael Cohen, but they don't have the actual check written. So they could come back and say, well, for the ones that we actually see the checks written, we'll say those were the ones that we decide were intentionally done by Trump as criminal acts, if they were doing that. They could also come back and say, listen, we believe it was the falsification of business records. That's a misdemeanor in New York. We don't believe, though, that this was a federal election crime. So you could have find Donald Trump guilty of misdemeanors that don't amount to felonies because it doesn't. The jury doesn't believe it attaches to the federal election, which you have to make this a felony case. Now, I think what's interesting here is when we get the reports on these closing arguments from the prosecution defenses, for the prosecution really to win here, they don't need that. They need you to take it all or nothing approach, or else it gets convoluted. You can also remember you can have a hung jury. So you do have to have a unanimous jury on each count. So I think that's where the confusion might be. So if you're going to find Donald Trump guilty of false business records on count 3, but you're not going to find him guilty of the election record, trying to violate the federal election law, you still have to have unanimity to find him guilty on that count, and you have to have at least somebody saying, I don't believe he violated the so somebody holding out on the second one.